Mouse keeps hearing humans talk about something called GDP. They always say things like, the GDP is up, or the GDP is down, or sometimes even, the GDP is sideways. But Mouse doesn't understand what they're squeaking about. It sounds important, maybe even serious, but no one ever explains it in a way a mouse can understand. So Mouse decides to find out. Mouse tries reading a big economics book. It's filled with long words, tiny graphs, and absolutely no cheese. After just one page, Mouse falls asleep. Clearly, this is not the mouse way. Mouse yawns, stretches, and decides to figure it out using mouse logic. GDP stands for Gross Domestic Product. That sounds like something only the smartest mice in mouse parliament talk about. But Mouse wants to understand, so he breaks it down into simpler parts. Gross means total, everything added together. Domestic means it happens inside the country, just Mouseland, not other places like Hamsterville or Squirrel City. And product means things that are made and sold, actual stuff like cheese traps, spinning wheels, and pizza. So GDP is just a fancy way of saying the total value of all the goods and services a country produces and sells in a year. All the things mice make, and all the things mice do for each other that involve payment, all get counted up. That's GDP. Mouseland's GDP. Let's imagine Mouse lives in a country called Mouseland. Mouse is quite the entrepreneur. He builds cheese traps and sells them to other mice. He bakes cheesy pizzas with crispy crusts. He even rents out his exercise wheel for cardio class. All of that adds to Mouseland's GDP. For example, Mouse makes a cheese trap and sells it for 10 cheese coins. That adds 10 to GDP. Then he sells a pizza for 15 cheese coins. Now GDP is up to 25. He rents out the spinning wheel for 5 more. That brings GDP to 30 cheese coins. Simple, right? Anything Mouse makes and sells counts. Not just physical items like pizza or traps, but services too. So if Mouse gives another mouse a fur cut and gets paid 3 cheese coins, that also adds to GDP. If he teaches a class on wheel safety or squeaky speech, that counts too. Building, baking, cleaning, consulting, if it's sold for cheese coins, it's part of GDP. But what's the point of GDP? Why do economists, presidents, and newscasters squeak about it so much? Well, when GDP goes up, it usually means the economy is healthy, more stuff is being made and sold, factories are busy, shops are open, more mice have jobs, more cheese is flowing, everyone is squeaking happily. A rising GDP usually means the country is doing well. But when GDP goes down, it's often a sign of trouble. That means fewer goods are being made and fewer services sold. Mice might lose jobs, shops might close, there's less cheese to go around, less spending, less building, fewer squeaks of joy. If GDP falls for 2 quarters in a row, that's 6 months, economists call it a recession. That's a fancy word for Mouse lands in trouble. When that happens, Mouse hides his emergency cheese and tightens his tail belt. But Mouse starts to wonder, is more GDP always better? Imagine a factory makes a huge amount of cheese and sells it all, raising GDP, but in the process, it dumps toxic cheese water into the river. Now the water is undrinkable, and mice are getting sick. GDP still goes up, but quality of life goes down. Or what if a mouse crashes his scooter and has to pay for repairs and a hospital visit? Those things add to GDP too, even though Mouse would much rather have avoided the crash. That's the tricky part. GDP doesn't care whether something is good or bad. It only measures how much is happening. So if there's a natural disaster and everyone has to rebuild homes and replace furniture, GDP might go up from all the spending, even though life just got worse. That's why some mice say GDP isn't the whole cheese. It's a helpful number, but it leaves out a lot. It doesn't measure whether the mice are happy, or healthy, or safe. It doesn't show how equally cheese is shared. One mouse could have a mountain of cheese while the others fight over crumbs, and GDP wouldn't notice. Even so, GDP is useful. It gives economists a sense of whether things are growing or shrinking, and it helps them compare one year to the next, or one country to another. But did you know there are different kinds of GDP? There's something called nominal GDP. That means the total value of everything produced, measured at current prices, whatever things cost today. But that can be misleading. If prices go up just because of inflation, nominal GDP will rise, even if no extra cheese was actually made. That's why economists also look at real GDP. Real GDP adjusts for inflation, so it shows how much stuff is truly being produced. It strips out the effect of rising prices. So if cheese prices double, but the same number of wheels are made, real GDP stays the same because no extra output was added. Then there's GDP per capita, which means GDP per mouse. You take the total GDP and divide it by the number of mice in the country. This tells you how much, on average, each mouse contributes or receives. It helps compare countries that have different population sizes. A big country with a high GDP might seem rich, but if it has too many mice, each one might still be poor. GDP per mouse gives a better picture of individual well-being. So how is GDP actually calculated? Do mouse accountants count every single cheese coin? Not exactly. In Mouseland, there's the Mouse Bank of Statistics. These are serious mice with glasses and clipboards. They track everything that gets bought and sold, not just goods, but services, government spending, business investments, and exports. They also subtract imports, things Mouseland buys from other countries, because that money goes elsewhere. They add all of this up every quarter, for times a year. When the number goes up, the mouse president calls a press conference and says, "Great news, Mouseland is growing." When the number goes down, the president sighs and says, "Oh, blame the cats." But remember, not everything counts in GDP. If Mouse bakes a cheese pie at home and eats it, it's not part of GDP. No one paid for it. If he fixes his own wheel or trades a slice of pizza for a tail massage, that doesn't count either. GDP only includes legal, market-based transactions, so no homemade goods, no favors, and definitely no alley cheese trades. Now Mouse asks the big question, does high GDP mean a better country? Sometimes, but not always. Mouseland might have sky-high GDP, but if all the cheese goes to just one big mouse, and the rest go hungry, that's not success, that's imbalance. GDP doesn't tell you if mice are smiling, sleeping well, or getting along with their neighbors. It just adds up the money part and leaves out everything else. That's why some mice look at other indicators too, things like health, education, happiness, safety, freedom, and even nap time per day. All those things matter too, because a good life isn't just about how full your fridge is, it's also about how you feel when you open it. Still, GDP is a helpful tool. It's like a cheese thermometer. It doesn't tell you everything, but it does show whether the economy is heating up, cooling down, or frozen solid. If GDP is growing, Mouseland is baking and booming. If GDP is shrinking, it might be time to panic and protect the cheese stash. When the GDP graph is rising, everyone's tail is high. But when it dips like a ski slope, the mice start to worry. That's when Mouse puts on his wool hat, stocks up on crackers, and hopes the economy warms up soon. So what does it all mean? GDP is the total value of all goods and services made and sold in a country each year. It includes legal market activity, both goods and services. It usually rises when the economy is active, but it doesn't count homemade things, trades, or happiness. It helps economists understand the big picture, but it doesn't show the whole story. Next time you hear someone say, GDP grew by 3% this quarter, just picture Mouseland baking 3% more cheese than before. That's GDP in action. Thanks for watching Moo's Economics. If you like this cheesy breakdown, nibble the like button. Subscribe for more mouse-sized economic wisdom. And remember, more cheese is great unless it's all sitting in one fat paw. Keep it fair, keep it squeaky. See you next time. Subscribe for more cheese wisdom.